as we get now this is the argument for sprawl that I'm trying to make, is that if you get farther away from these urban centers, the houses should become less expensive because they're not near these coveted areas where people want to live, like Hollywood, Los Angeles, Santa Monica, and stuff like that. And this could be cheaper and cheaper housing for lower income people.
That's right. There's numerous ways of providing affordable housing. And one way, which you correctly point out, is you can have people live outside of the downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, what we have around here in San Jose and San Francisco, and LA is thinking about adopting this, is they want every single area to be just as affordable as every other area. And as economics will tell you, that just can't work.
Is the housing crisis, is this created by the government?
Clearly, there's no national affordability crisis. It's pocketed in particular areas of high government regulation. California, the Northeast. Look at the Midwest. There's no housing affordability crisis there, and government hasn't been messing up the building industry for nearly as long there.
Is there more room there to build houses?
Look how much room there is in California to build houses.
Half the land in California is owned by the government, and it's not developed. So that's a reason why.
Matter of fact, want to talk about how to fix a budget crisis in California? How valuable is the undeveloped land that the government owns in the city of San Francisco and other areas? Sell it off, you can fix two problems at once.
Yeah, and the fact there's something on the ballot proposing to do just that, and I can't believe it. It's incredibly sensible. They're going to actually sell off some land to pay off some of the bonds. I couldn't believe it. But so,
you know, you brought up a good point before too that we didn't get a chance to say something about the rich people that live in these price controls homes. And inclusionary zoning, when you're going in, you have to be income qualified, low to moderate income. But that's when you're going in. Everybody starts out their life at a lower income, and you find that earnings are go over a life cycle. You start off low, you get higher income as you move into your 40s, 50s, and then it drops off later in retirement where you have more assets but less income. Well, what happens with these price-controlled homes is people qualify when they are low income, but they start making a lot more, but then they stay there. Not because they're mean people who don't want to make it available to somebody else, but because they come with resale restrictions. They can't cash out the equity, what most middle-class families, how they save. So they get stuck there because they don't have the money for a down payment on a newer house that has appreciated. Well, they're stuck in this home, and then it never becomes available for another poor person again.
Some of these homes are even, some of the apartments that are rent controlled are even subleased by
That's
people.
right. There was a study of Sunnyvale, and it found that over half of the units were illegally subletted out to other people. So we've got these great policy where the poor people get to move in on day one, and then after a couple of years, they're not even living in the units, but they're still collecting all that extra money.
And the information too that we have on poverty and low income is that it changes very quickly. People move out of being low income very fast.
If you look at a study, there was a study, University of Michigan panel data on this, that showed people who were in the bottom fifth of income earners in the late 1970s, when you moved to the early 1990s, only 10% were still in the bottom fifth of income earners, and a full 70% had moved all the way to the top fifth. There's tremendous mobility.
So I really want to hear about how anyone is actually listening to you guys, and that they're going to actually, this is actually going to result in some change of legislation somewhere.
Well, we've had a couple pieces of success. The first was a proposal in Fort Ord in Monterey County. This Congressman, Sam Farr, wanted to impose price controls on 50% of new homes, have them sold for about $350,000 less than market price. And we came in and we actually gave a talk and a presentation about how this would not be a good idea for Monterey County. And surprisingly, the board actually agreed with us, and they voted against Sam Farr's proposal.
Some people are really actually interested in promoting housing affordability, especially on the local level. We've talked to a lot of mayors and council people who are interested in this. Now, Sam Farr, I don't think he wanted anything to do with affordable housing. He wanted a soundbite. But the mayors and the city councilors who were on this panel, it was going to be their communities that were affected. They actually wanted the housing. They voted him down, and then they actually quoted us in the newspaper for their reason of voting him down.
So what is the real solution? I mean, we've gone over it a little bit. What's the real solution here, concretely, to, we've gone over some abstracts. So what is the real process you can make to make housing more affordable?
Okay, the worst way of encouraging more housing is price controls on more housing. So what we first need to do is get rid of the price controls. That's going to encourage the market to provide additional housing. So the government doesn't need to be going around telling people, build more housing, build more of this type of housing. The whole idea is to allow the market process to work.
Command and control doesn't work for the Soviet Union. It doesn't work in urban planning either. It's that simple. When we have private developers who can develop communities, they lay out the optimal community based on what their expected profits are going to be. They design roads, parks. They don't just pave it all over. I mean, think of your latest condominium complex that you saw. How many of them are just a pure parking lot with a bunch of houses stacked? They mix it up because they want to try to provide maximum value to the people who are moving in there. Sometimes they cater to lower income groups and they pack them in more because they can make them more affordable for the people that way. Other times they provide more green space. A great example is Sea Ranch up on the northern coast of California. Large private development whose one of its central missions was environmental preservation while building housing in there. All the housing was built to mix with the land and provide environmental use and coastal access. The private sector is completely capable of this.
It's very hard to get the government to look at itself, though, and say that I'm the problem. It's like getting an alcoholic to stand up at the meeting and say, "Hi, my name is Bill, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm the problem." It's really hard to get politicians to do that, too.
That's right. It's kind of interesting. They have been saying there are problems, but what they've been saying is, well, it was the previous planners who have been having problems. But now we've learned the current central planners know how to do it.
But, aren't some people saying, oh, you guys are just a couple of right-wingers. You don't care about the poor. You were hired to provide this information by people who wanted you to give them these figures.
We actually care about the poor more than the people who advocate price controls because we actually know that the poor are going to be harmed by the price controls. So I think we're compassionate economists, don't you, Ben?
Actually, in purely self-interest terms, got to tell you, it's not necessarily in mine. It started off that way. I wanted homes to be more affordable for me. Since then, I've bought a home recently. Now, the more restrictions there are, the more it drives up my equity.
But, I mean, how can you really convince people of the integrity of your information?
Well, the thing is, when you can't argue with the data or the theory, people are going to slam their fist on the table and point at you and say there's something about you. What you can do is show them the rigor of the argument, the logic of it, and say, this is how it is, see if they can understand that. If not, you have to go to the empirical data and show them when you restrict it, when you have passed these price controls, you get a 30% drop in new construction. A drop in new construction hurts everybody. Once they start looking at the data, and this is how we've talked to so many city councilors and mayors about this, is because they're able to look at the data in their own communities similar to theirs, and see how bad it's been. Then they start to come around, regardless of what they think of me personally.
The other thing is, it's not a very controversial view within economics. So there are economists who are left-wing, right-wing, and pretty much all of them agree. I think it was 98% of economists agree. Price controls on housing or on rental housing decreases the quantity or quality of housing. So it's the same issue here.
So there is a peer review kind of a effort going on.
In fact, the studies that we've published have been peer reviewed in the public policy think tanks that have published them. We've had the comments from other scholars as we've gone through our revisions on it, and occasionally made marginal changes to them, but for the most part everybody was agreeing from the get-go. Yeah, you got it right, guys. You're an economist. Congratulations. Supply curves slope upward.
Yeah, when I look at data from like this, what I try to do is I try to make sure that it's being used everywhere. That, publications that one would see on the left, the right, and the center are all using this data. And that's one way that I test data to make sure I'm not looking at left or right-wing propaganda, and I'm looking at something.
Some of these so-called economic consultants who have no formal graduate training in economics whatsoever, who consult on these housing projects, will come up and say, well, we've done a comparative study on affordable housing and shown that it doesn't restrict the supply of housing at all. I said, oh, great, will you send me the data? And what you invariably get is, well, we took one city from Southern California, one from Northern California, of two completely different sizes that had each passed inclusionary zoning once. Then we picked two other cities in the state to compare it to who don't have inclusionary zoning. Look, they produce the same. Well, how many jurisdictions do we have in California? And how